Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron.
I have grown to appreciate having stronger, stricter types in PHP.
Hmm.
And I will admit that while I see the benefit of it, it can occasionally feel a little tedious or, especially when you're working in a framework like Laravel that has some really nice convenience things that maybe don't play nicely with static analysis. And so I thought today we could kind of talk through a couple specific examples, get a little nerdy, where either we worked around some typing limitations in Laravel to make the experience better, or other places where we're like, you know what? I don't care that I'm not going to worry about that type checking, and kind of like the balance we strike in those two approaches.
Yeah, I think that that's a good topic. One of the issues I run into is like with PHP, we know it can be loose typed.
Hmm.
So how much typing do we do? And like if the typing isn't working, should I just remove all that? And
Yeah.
which sets of equals should I use? And is it coming from the browser or an API? There's so many
Oh,
so many
sure.
different things there. So I mean, this could be a giant topic, but what I think you're kind of talking about is like either static analysis or convenience helpers in our code that make it just a little bit easier for us to do our work.
Right.
And so I think I can give an example. One of the things that we kind of talked about before is there's PHP DAC that you can put in line with your functionality. And I think
Hmm.
you've mentioned this in like your tips podcast or your newsletter and stuff, but
Hmm.
you can basically put a particular at var sign defining variable into something else, and that won't affect the programmatic part of it, but it will affect IDE or any sort of intelligence or anything like that that you have analyzing your code, whether it's
Hmm.
PHP stan or your IDE. Basically, say that this variable is now of this other type.
Right. Yeah. And so we use those. You might look at it and you might say, well, you're just adding this stuff into your code and it's, you just to make the tool happy or whatever. But that's
Yeah,
that's a direction that we've found. Yes, it adds some things to the code that are just to make the tool happy, but it's not too invasive and it's not changing how the code runs. And like we're okay with that, right? So we don't go nuts. You're not going to have like 30 var doc blocks for every variable, ideally, like most of them to actually be statically analyzed correctly on their own. But in some cases, we'll throw one in there, right? Like that's a compromise we've lived with. Um, I want to bring up another example, if this is okay. And it was one we were just looking at together, which is where Laravel does provide a type, but it's not quite the type we want. So to get specific, like if you're in a controller and you have the request and you say request arrow user,
hmm
you get a user, but it's not a user. You want to talk through that example?
yeah. So when you do that, you're going to get basically an interface. They've type hinted that with a return with an interface. So an interface or a contract, if you're going to be abstract about it. Well, this is a horrible word to use when I'm
Ah.
talking about it. But a contract in programming parlance is returned, and so that identifies according to the framework. You basically call a framework method, and the framework is saying, well, of the things that I know about a user, I only know these public things that we've already defined that you must have because of the contract. So
Yeah,
I'll just return an instance of that. Whereas they can't know specifically in your application all the different things you've done on the user, different
right.
methods you added, properties, all that kind of stuff, and they shouldn't know
Yeah,
that. And so that's where the difference is. So when you call request user, you get what looks like an instance of that contract, but it's missing all of the additional functionality. And let's be clear, you can still use the functionality
sure.
on it.
It works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it just it
Test will
doesn't
pass.
autocomplete.
Yep.
Your static analysis won't work, and so that's that problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And so one solution that kind of leading to the previous thing we were talking about, one solution would be like anytime you do request user, you sign it to a variable or you put a var doc block and you say, nope, this is like an app models user, not like Illuminate Foundation authenticatable or whatever it
Yeah,
typings
yeah.
has normally. But I like the solution you came up with. Um, and I'm going to share it because I'm going to tell everybody it was my idea. And
Okay.
no, but it was just a very simple trait was a trait, right? Called
Yeah.
provides authenticated user. I probably should have pulled up the code. But anyways, this simple trait, I think just had one method on it, which was it get user or was it just user or it was
I think it's like get authenticated user.
okay. Yeah. So, but it was one method and all it returned was the, request arrow or off colon user, right? Because we don't know what context you're going to be calling this in. But the only benefit is that it had a return type of app model user, right? So now we can, by bringing this trait in at a high level, right? So we're not bringing this trait into like hundreds of places. You could use that method and get the user type and not have to have a var doc block. Did I explain it
Yeah.
correctly?
Yeah, and since it's a trait, we can use it in the controller if we're going to
Mm-hmm.
work with something there. You can use it in request class directly, all that different stuff. So,
Yeah,
yeah, that's kind of one of the solutions. Now, again, all these things are like specific to your use case, and you don't want to make a bunch of getter functions just to change the return types either. Since it's a trait, you can import it into like the controller or into the request classes, anything like that, and so you can use that wherever you need.
I like it. I like it. So I'm gonna throw out one more example, and this is a place where maybe I pushed the boundary, and you're like,
Oh, actually, can I interrupt you? I got one quick aside.
okay,
Um, it's been kind of on my mind. There's something you said earlier that has been hanging in my mind. You said something about like making sure that the tool is, or not just making changes for the tool, make the tool happy.
right,
Um, and if you know me, one of the questions I always ask is why. Like, why is that? Why is
sure,
why X, Y, Z? So you're right. Sometimes we make these changes to make the tool happy. But I remember when we were working together too, like you would make a change or something and you'd be like, hey, I did this because now PHP stand is passing. And I didn't like the code change. So I'd say, but why? And if your answer was it makes the code standards like the code
yeah.
standards, I'm not okay with that. That's
Like
that's
if you
not
didn't
cool.
have a deeper understanding as to why the types didn't line up or like what the trade-off
Right.
was. Okay.
Right. And so I
Yeah.
just wanted to
Like
make sure we covered that too. Is like some of these things, we got to make sure we understand the why behind them.
yeah, no, I think that's actually and before you saying that, it didn't quite crystallize for me that way, but it's not just whether we're making a tool happy or not, but it's like, are you just doing something to make an error go away and you don't really know what's going on?
Right.
Like that's where we feel uncomfortable. But okay, so I'm gonna go back to what I was about to say,
Yeah.
which
That
is
what's that third one?
the third thing where we ultimately decided like this was going too far was actually adding code to make the tool happy and with understanding of why. And so like an example of this is in PHP, there is a language provided function called assert, right? And you can say like I assert this variable is an instance of whatever, or
Hmm.
like you can do that. And at runtime, if it happens to not be, it would actually throw an exception, right?
Right.
And so I had put those things in there to make PHP stand happy because PHP stand looks at those assertions and it uses that to infer like, okay, well, if past that line, I know that variable is definitely instance of or a subclass
Right.
of or whatever. Um, and you're like, what are you doing, Joel? Why didn't you like that, Aaron?
Well, again, it was so we're adding a bunch of extra functionality. I don't actually know how assert works underneath the hood, and I'm not a
Okay.
huge like I'm not worried about micro optimizations per se,
Yeah.
but it was tooling or coding that you were doing just for the tool.
Right.
Like it wasn't that like, oh, I personally don't know sometimes if this is the wrong variable, so I'm going to write defensive coding. It was I'm
Sure.
perfectly fine, everything's fine. I even have tests they're passing. Now
Yep.
this tool doesn't like this, so I'm going to use
Yep.
this extra bit of code now. So I've actually put code in for something that is measuring the quality of my code. It's a circle.
Yeah.
Oh, I was
Yeah.
furious
I
that
know.
day.
Well, and to be fair, this was on sort of like not a hobby project, but it was an experimental project where I
Yeah.
had like PHP stand all the way up to max, which we never do. And so
Hmm.
that I was just throwing things at the wall to see what would stick. But for me, I kind of knew when I did it, like, this isn't great. And the reason is like if we go back to this example of like authenticatable versus user, let's just say I assert this is an instance of user. Like, would that actually throw an exception? Right now, I've broken my code trying to make
Hmm.
the tool happy. It's like the complete opposite direction from why we're trying to use static analysis, why we're introducing types. It's like it's you're serving the tool and actually weakening the reason that you're using the tool like that. It just
Right.
makes no sense.
I'm kind of a student of human nature, and I love watching people, not like weird, like sitting in the mall and watching people. Okay, so a mall is a place where there's a bunch of okay,
People know what a
um,
mall is. It hasn't been that
okay,
long.
but I just like understanding how humans exist and think. You know that I'm constantly asking questions and trying to understand how people think about stuff.
I feel like I want to ask, are you watching me right now? What are you learning from this experience?
No, it's not that. It's just the ways that we make decisions in our life are pretty interesting. So, for example, when you bond with humans, like think about like growing up and how you bonded with friends and stuff. Like, for example, or you just meet someone at a
Mhm.
conference, you find out, well, his name's Aaron too. Best friends, clearly, same names. I mean, are you like that? Like, so if you met another Joel, you'd immediately be like, well, this guy's awesome.
I was thinking it could go either way, best friend or like, he's my nemesis now. Like it can only be one of me in this group.
Oh yeah, like a Highlander sort of thing.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
There can be only one Joel. Hey Joel, do you know what my most favorite meal in the world is? It's mashed potatoes and beef tips.
That seems a little random, but I know what you're doing. You want to tell people about our new books of tips. We published 3 volumes. Just go to masteringlaravel.io, click on tips, and you can see where to download those books.
Delicious.